It's time for the Roots and Roots Show with your host, Greg Rashid, bringing you history and music from the Black American diaspora. Greg and his guests' goal is to root the show's information in your psyche, providing you the roots to expand knowledge within your community. Now here's your host, Greg Rashid.
I want to say Swati Kop to everyone out there, which means hello in Thailand. And those of you who are new to the program, The Root and Root Show, I am based in Bangkok, Thailand. But a lot of you already know that. We're going to have another great show, and I'm going to get to the interview immediately. But first of all, I want to say I hope everyone's doing well right now, and that I want to thank the folks that are listening. I found out I have some folks listening in the Ukraine. I couldn't believe that. So I want to say hi to my friends in the Ukraine, folks in San Lucia, new people are picking up, so many people all over the world. And a lot of folks listen at their convenience, various spots on the internet all over the world, but a lot of folks listen every Sunday afternoon, 3 p.m. Mountain Time, on KUHSdenver.com, created by the one and only, the true meaning of Christmas himself, Henry Archuleta. And I want to say hi to all my friends in the Colorado region. But we're going to get to my interview right now. And who I interviewed is Joe Dorison. He wrote an excellent book on the Black athlete as hero. And we're going to get to that interview right now. So let's do this right here on the Root and Root Show. And this is Greg Rashid again with the Root and Root Show. And I'm just so happy to have on this program author, historian, activist, who's written a great book here. The name of the book is The Black Athlete as Hero, American Barrier Breakers in 9 Sports. And it's on McFarland Press. And I want to let my listeners know who are listening in Colorado that he also has a Colorado link as far as, and I didn't know this till just a few minutes ago. So I'm just going to let him say what that link is about. But who I'm talking about is Joe Dorison. He's the author of this great book, and he is just a wonderful guy. Just a wonderful guy. Reading this book and just briefly talking to him, I can say you're going to really enjoy the interview. Are you there, Joe?
I'm fine, except for my computer, which is somewhat sick tonight. But I'll try to do my best on radio.
You will be doing great. Now, tell my listeners your connection to Colorado, because like I said, I just found this out a few minutes ago when you told me.
Right. I'm proud to report that my cousin is Jared Schutz-Polis, the governor of Colorado. And he's doing a terrific job fighting for people of color, people with all kinds of backgrounds and orientations. And I'm proud to be related to him.
Wow, didn't even know that. Didn't even know this connection.
Yes. In fact, when he received my last book, which had a different title, different subject, he actually went on Facebook with the cover and said, "I'm reading this book." So
wow.
I was delighted by that promotion. I'd like to mention how I got involved in this subject.
Yes,
I
definitely.
came from a very active family, immigrants, working class, and they sent me to an interracial camp as a child. So as a child, I had an encounter with one of the subjects of my book, Paul Bustle Robeson. Robeson came when he was marginalized because of his political views, and he came to our camp where he sang and he expressed his world philosophy for brotherhood and peace. And what impressed me most as a child, because I was about 10 years old when I first met him, actually, and on a picket line down in City Hall, we were protesting something. My mother was always going to these protesting something. So here was this wonderful man with a deep baritone, and we were worried because as people of the left, we often felt in danger. It was the beginning of the McCarthy era, and there was this big bear of a man who gave us confidence, and he was so dignified. And so I learned also about black culture through another visitor at our camp. His name was W.E.B. Du Bois, and he also was marginalized because of his
Right.
politics as well as his racial position and on many issues.
I mean, this is
So I
amazing.
decided
This is
when I
amazing,
became
Joe, that to meet someone who met Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois. I mean, that's something.
right,
That is
and they left an impression on me. And in a sense, I'm going to bring in Du Bois later when we discuss Kenny Washington, because Kenny Washington was more inclined to favor the Booker T. Washington's approach to racial relations,
right,
and that may have caused him to lose his standing with not only with the black community, but young activists like me who felt aggression, not accommodation, was the way to change America.
right.
So,
And I have to
to,
say
to,
this to my
to
listeners before you go on, that Joe and I kind of met on Facebook because I have, as a lot of my listeners know, because I've been for years promoting my Facebook site and just my petition to put Kenny Washington in the Football Hall of Fame, Pro Football Hall of Fame. And Joe
right,
was kind enough to say something on that site. And I said, wait a minute, I know this name because I have a connection over the years with McFarland, and they were in the process of sending me the PDF of your book. And I said, well, wow, this is happenstance. So this works out perfectly. This is perfect.
wonderful.
Right. But go ahead, Joe.
All right. Well, anyway, when I was young, I was involved in civil rights activities. I picketed Woolworths because it wouldn't hire African Americans. In 1965, with a bunch of young scholars and our professors, we went down to Atlanta, and it's in the book. I mention it
Right.
that we were involved in a voter registration drive under the auspices of Dr. King's organization, the Southern Christian Conference, and we worked with young white and black activists. And in a sense, what we accomplished in 1965 led ultimately to the election of Barack Obama and to Raphael Warnock, because the Atlanta that I encountered in 65 was far different from the Atlanta of today. It was still segregated, it was violent, and it needed change. And so
Yeah.
I appeared, we had to introduce ourselves. And I said, my name is Joe Dorrison. I study history. I teach history. I would like to write history, but I came to Atlanta to make history. And I got a rousing, enthusiastic applause and praise from no better orator in America than Bayard Rustin,
Oh yeah.
who organized the March on Washington. So that gave me a real sense of camaraderie with the cause. Now, when I was in graduate school at Columbia with a lot of other great activists and scholars like Eric Foner, who's written tremendously valuable books on
Oh yeah.
Reconstruction and civil rights. And I felt compelled to write something in sports history because I was a fanatic. But in those days, the academics looked down on sports history as something inappropriate for the academy. Well, 20 years later, when I introduced my first sports history course at Long Island University, it suddenly became a hot topic. And today, sports history is really dominating the field of popular culture
It certainly is.
because athletes, particularly black athletes, who formerly were forced to play, uh, if not an Uncle Tom role, they had to shut up and dribble, to quote a person on the far right. And so many athletes, unlike Jackie Robinson, uh, thought that they would get pie in the sky by and by. And Kenny Washington, your hero and mine, because he is a pioneer, felt that the Washington approach, the Booker T. Washington approach, was stand down, cast down your bucket where you stand, play the game. Uh, uh, you you give ground to get around, and you try to show that you can be an exemplary citizen accepting a subordinate role in society. Well, Du Bois, with all due respect, in his famous uh, uh, Souls of Black Folk, written in 1903, uh, said, "No, Mr. Washington, we have to do more. We have a talented tenth among our people, and we're no longer going to sit by and wait for either Armageddon or Pie in the Sky or Cabin in the
Right.
Sky, to quote one of my favorite films." But that was what distinguished Jackie from Kenny. Both were outstanding athletes. In fact, here's the irony. In baseball at UCLA, where they both played multiple sports, Kenny Washington was a far better hitter and
Oh well,
player. He had
we
450.
were talking about this on the show months ago. The fact is that Kenny hit, I think, around 400 at UCLA. Jackie
Yeah,
Robinson hit 097. That was his batting average.
that's correct. That's correct. And
But
made 10
everyone
errors.
said that Kenny was way better as a baseball
Right.
player. In
At
fact,
that point in
there are some arguments. Looking at old newspapers, I do that a lot. There's an argument that Kenny was actually could have been in the majors and would have been a much better player. And Jackie Robinson was a great player than
right.
Jackie Robinson.
Well,
That's how good he was.
yeah, and there's another thing that emerges from their lifestyle. Jackie, as a teetotaling Methodist, did not drink or smoke. Unfortunately, when things went badly for Kenny Washington, he succumbed to his father's proclivity for drink. And I think that caused problems. But the key to Washington's inability to make it to the top of the pyramid, if you will, of sports was not only that he was born too soon and he probably picked the wrong sport, because in 1939, baseball was the national game. Football was still searching for an identity. And Robinson was actually more, you might say, a better athlete because he excelled in four sports, baseball being one of his weakest. He was an outstanding track and field star. He was also a basketball player who
Right.
actually led the Pacific Coast Conference. And it's surprising to me that Kenny Washington didn't go into basketball because he was taller, he was stronger than Robinson. As Robinson said, I was not going to mess with him. Their relationship was somewhat fraught because Robinson was not a very personable guy. He bore grudges. He was angry, and Kenny was the big man on campus. Everybody loved him.
Oh
He
yeah.
had an outgoing personality, and so at the beginning, Kenny's approach was far more acceptable After all, there were only a handful of black students at UCLA at the time, and Washington, when he actually the last game he played, as I recall from my reading, and you probably know it better than me, uh, he got a standing ovation. Well, actually, it was his buddy, the great football player turned actor, who made a career as the great slave rebel in Spartacus. And he was a close friend of both Robinson
Right.
and
And you're talking about Woody Strode.
Washington.
The amazing.
Woody, that's right. And of course, he also played in some of those Tarzan movies as a stereotypical Indian or African, but
Right.
he was a terrific athlete in his own right. And he doesn't get full credit either because he went to play football in the Canadian League where he tore up the pea patch, to quote a Red Barber phrase.
Yeah, if I'm not
So,
mistaken, he's in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. I mean,
that's
yeah,
right.
I'm going to be.
And
I'll say, in the future we'll be talking about Woody Strode on here because he comes up often.
okay.
Talking about Kenny Washington,
Oh,
and I have to say something about Kenny that I haven't mentioned before, but you know that Kenny Washington, some boxing promoters asked him if he could box, and they put him in the gym and had him do some sparring with some guys. And the promotional fighters, professional fighters, also promoters who said that he looked so good that they thought he could fight Joe Louis. That he would get
wow!
Joe
I
Louis.
didn't know that.
Yeah, that was how good he was as an athlete. That they actually thought about him. But but again, Kenny Washington's a nice guy. He said he's not really a fighter, so he never did that. But they could see
Right.
that he had
Well,
so much talent that he could do that.
well, my I guess my insight when I reread his biography, I noticed that he had a severe injury to both knees
Yeah,
at the age 10. And that was a recurrent problem. Of course, when you play football at his level, and often when he played for the Hollywood Bears and other semi-pro teams, he took a terrible beating. So when he finally broke the color barrier in sport, or reintegrated
yeah, reintegrated.
sports
Yeah,
in 1946, he was no longer the Kenny Washington of 1939. And yet, in 1947, a year later, after his fifth knee surgery, what does he do? He averages almost 7 yards a carry.
right.
He runs back against the Chicago Cardinals from scrimmage a 92-yard touchdown run,
Which is
amazing given his.
It's still the
knee
Rams'
issues.
record. It still is the record.
That's right. That's right. Unbelievable. And the thing about Kenny, I met Kenny. I was so awed. I think I mentioned it to you in an email. In 1964, I was in L.A. Actually, I visited Berkeley, and I was in Watts 1 year before the Watts riots. And I was invited to the home of a prominent writer, Louis Lomax, and
Really?
there was Kenny Washington.
Oh my
And
God.
I was so awed by. Now most of there were about 3 whites there. There was one who was married to a black woman, and my friend was had a African American boyfriend. She was actually the former wife of my college roommate, and she introduced me to all these very powerful people. They were lawyers, they were business people, they were athletes, and I was so awed. And what struck me is how could Watts go up in flames? Because I didn't understand. I thought, well, these people have made it. They're successful. They were basically Rockefeller Republicans. I remember talking politics, and they thought Rockefeller was the answer to many issues. And
Yeah.
Rockefeller and Jackie Robinson had a very profound relationship. But, and it's interesting that Kenny Washington, like Jackie Robinson, supported Nixon in 1960. And when Nixon ran for senator in 62 against Pat Brown, he also supported. Uh, so, in a sense, like many African Americans prior to the New Deal, they were rooted in the Republican Party, and that's understandable because the Democratic Party was a party of segregation
Right.
and lynching, if you want to take it to its extreme. And the Republican Party was a party of Lincoln.
Yeah.
So I think Kenny, in politics at least, was caught in a time warp, and he didn't see the changes that were coming. Even Jackie suffered at one point. He was considered irrelevant. Now, my problem and my thesis is that we allow our heroes, and heroes are of different persuasion. They can be on the right, center right, or on the left, and there's a tendency in our culture to dethrone heroes, to knock them off the pedestal. I think it's part of our American way of leveling the playing field, and we do so at our own expense. We lose sight of
Right.
what they did.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
Kenny Washington and Woody Strode did, albeit after their prime, is that they reintegrated a sport which is now predominantly black. The best players, and in my book, I have a chapter on the black quarterback.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
black quarterbacks were not allowed to play that role. In fact, Kenny Washington was really a quarterback because in the single wing formation, he did passing and he ran. And apparently, according to observers, he could throw a football 60 to 70 yards
I have a
accurately.
right. I
And,
have a picture
and
from one of the old newspapers where he's throwing a 72-yard pass. And at the
right,
time, another record that he was breaking at the Coliseum. Like they had never seen anything like that. Anyone.
right.
And I'm talking about some,
And
years later with
and
Sammy Ball, folks like that, Sid Luckman.
yeah,
No one had ever done that.
yes. He was the best player in college in 1939. And not to have him play against the best in that segregated society. And the villain of the piece is George Preston Marshall.
Oh, we have done a number of shows about him over the years. And I'm from Washington, D.C. originally. Yeah, we're not going to get into that now. That would change the whole tenor of the show. Because, but let me get back, for listeners who are just tuning in, I'm talking with Joe Dorison, the author of the new book, The Black Athlete as Hero, American Barrier Breakers in 9 Sports. Now, I want to ask you this, Joe. At the beginning of the book, your book is in a sense a response to another book that I read many years ago that I still have issues with. The book by John Hoberman, Darwin's Athlete.
Yes.
Talk a little about that. Talk a little about that.
Well, yeah, I take issue with his school of thought because he's not alone in this notion. And even Harry Edwards, for whom I have the greatest regard, said that the black athlete served as a gladiator to entertain white folks and make more money for the white owners of their plantation. I like that image up to a point, but I think it denies the agency and the humanity of the black athlete. Even those who played the game and didn't make waves, as I point out, Roy Campanella was not a breastfeeder, maybe because he had a white father, I don't know, or just he was an accommodationist. But he, in his own way, fought prejudice.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not new. and what you have is the duality. Maybe it's sort of like a microcosm. You're either in the camp of Du Bois, who wanted an aggressive attack on discrimination, on racism, on oppression, or you were accommodationist who says we have to accept the conditions. We have to prove by our dignity and our restraint that we can be accepted as equals. And then, of course, the third model that I discuss is the avoidance model, which was Marcus Garvey's solution: go back to Africa. And the answer to that is, why go back to Africa when America was built on the backs of black slaves and immigrant workers? This
Yeah,
is
we can
our
we can get
country.
into a whole thing about Garvey on the show. I'm not going to do that today. But and a lot of people don't
Yeah,
really understand. When I look at the old newspapers again about Garvey and all I'm saying is, like, I have a different opinion of him than I had when I was in college, when I was in my 20s. That's all I'll say.
right.
But he's not. I'll just say he's not what he's uh, a lot of people think he is. That's all I'll say. But anyway, as far as the book, I really, I like how in a short, because the book it's not really long in the one sense, but you cover so much in all these athletes. You somehow,
Right.
I'm
I
amazed how
had
you can do this. How you
w-
can get to the
well,
social
that was
aspect
yeah,
and their history.
that was the challenge. My editor didn't like that approach, but I felt that so many athletes go under the radar.
Yeah,
It's part of our throwaway culture. Uh, Hero today and bum tomorrow, or for, oblivion.
right.
And I felt compelled to bring men and women out of obscurity, out of neglect, and uh, show how they affected the society. Now, in my chapter, which I added belatedly on Sugar Ray Robinson, I had seen and I had read about his behavior towards his second wife and his children and his. Anyway, he stayed in the ring too long.
Well, yeah, he
But
had
how
dementia.
can you deny his importance? He's the greatest boxer, in my judgment, maybe with the exception of Ali, pound for pound. And he created a mystique that blacks don't have to shuffle along. They can drive fancy cars. They can dress to the nines. They can go to Paris and be like Josephine Baker and be treated like royalty. And so he was in his own way. And even in his later years, he was suffering from Alzheimer's, but he and his last wife created a foundation to help
Right.
inner city youths. And among the beneficiaries was Florence Joyner and other athletes who
And I'm
came
glad you brought her
from,
up in the book. Glad you put her in there. Happy to see that.
yes, right. And she was besmirched by a drug charge, which was never proven. And she's probably has the greatest performance record in the history of Olympics
And
in terms
also
of her
a real,
speed.
and she's a real inspiration.
Right,
all the athletes that you talk about in the book are inspirational, and they are heroes. And she still is one in the community, in all communities. Now, FloJo was
right.
something, but I want to get
And
to.
yeah,
Go ahead.
I want to follow up because too often the black community and the white community were concerned about the sexuality of their female athletes. For a long time, basketball players of the feminine persuasion couldn't actually dribble. They had to pass the ball
Right.
because there was this assumption they would lose their fertility if they were too active on the
Yeah.
court. Nonsense. But what you have in the athlete like FloJo and Jackie in-law, you have
That could join the
beauty
curses.
as
Yeah.
well as,
Right.
and so they didn't lose their femininity, and that's important because I remember Billie Jean King went through hell when it was revealed that she was a lesbian,
Oh yeah.
and her partner tried to commit suicide, and it was a setback.
Well,
But here you have theme.
right. Well,
I'm
it's like
sorry to
as
interrupt.
we're speaking today, and a lot of people listen to the show later on, obviously because we're taping. But I mean, December 10th, 2022, as we're speaking, Brittany Griner is on her way back to America after being in
Right.
Russia, and
Yes.
it's something you said. But
Uh,
there are some folks, I could name some names. I won't do it, but there's some folks I know in media who have really criticized her.
right.
And it gets down to her look, her sexual persuasion,
Yes.
and it's awful.
Right.
And I know
I
I've seen
agree.
some
And as
reporters say, some male reporters saying, well, she should just stay, just keep her keep her
yeah.
in Russia, just keep her there. It's awful.
Well, it goes back. That bias goes back to Babe Didrikson
Oh yeah,
Harrius. She was the greatest female athlete of her time, a white athlete, because blacks couldn't compete at the level. And she was challenged to a race by Paul Gallico, a famous reporter, sports reporter, uh, who wrote for the Daily News, among other papers. And he challenged her to a race, and she beat him. And
yeah,
he couldn't accept defeat because he fancied himself a great athlete himself.
right.
And he began to disdain and disparage her sexuality and imply overtly, not, more than imply, that she was a lesbian. And so when you have beautiful athletes who are both feminine and extremely gifted, it changes the mindset of people.
Oh, it
And
definitely does.
I think that, and also, Serena Williams and her sister Venus also had to face racism
I was about to
and
say that.
sexual innuendo, and I put in belatedly Naomi Osaka,
Yeah, because
not only because
she's going through that.
because she raises a point along with Simone Biles that athletes are human and they
Right.
can have meltdowns and and yet they fight through it and they're able to rise from the ashes like the proverbial phoenix in Greek mythology. So,
and I'm glad that you put her, there's so many of these athletes you put in the book. I really was glad you did that because I know there's some listeners out there.
well,
And again,
thank you.
listeners, I'm talking to Joe Dorison, author of the new book, The Black Athlete as Hero, American Barrier Breakers in 9 Sports. And there's so many that a lot of people don't know or have forgotten. There's some little things that you say about some of these athletes that I said, oh, I forgot. That's right. She did that or he did
Yeah.
that. I'm just happy that you did that. I wanted to ask you, though, there are a couple of, because all these
Okay.
people you talk about in the book, they all were or are considered like, they are heroes in community,
Yes.
and I can say this being over here in Asia, that there are some of these athletes you mentioned in the book that transcend America.
Right.
Every day. Every
right.
day I can, anywhere I go in Thailand or Japan, you name it, I'm going to always see a number 20, someone wearing 23. And that's
Yes,
for Michael Jordan.
I was just going to say that. Michael Jordan may not have supported a black candidate for senator a number of years ago, but he globalized the game of basketball, and he actually advanced the cause of human rights and black pride with his charismatic brilliance. My favorite, I must confess, however, is Bill Russell, because not only did he transform the game, but he was such a man of honor and principle, refused to sign autographs, refused to play the docile player, but he has the best record as a winner of any principal sport, any principal player. 13 years, 11 championships, one as
Right.
the first black coach in the NBA, and a tremendous presence. And I can't say enough about the NBA establishment naming the MVP in his honor, because
yeah.
if anybody deserves this tribute, it's
And plus, if I'm not
Mr.
mistaken, in your
Russell.
book,
I would like to mention, I don't know how much
uh-huh,
time we have left.
a few more
Okay,
minutes.
I met him at a Jackie Robinson Foundation dinner in
Man.
1997, and at that time everyone was talking about Michael Jordan, who is king of the hill, and I said, in my judgment, Mr. Russell, you're still the king of the hill. We didn't use the GOAT phrase then.
Right.
And he looked at me and he said, "You really believe that?" I said, "Sure." And he cackled, "Ah!" And he left. And I was so happy that I was able to tell that to him.
Yeah.
And
Russell,
one of my thrills, yeah, one of my thrills is it's in the book. I'm pictured with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who came to
right.
Brooklyn. He was coaching his son in a minor league basketball game. And I was introduced to him, and contrary to image that he was standoffish and he was rude, he was so gracious, so friendly, and we took that photograph, and I seemed to be up to his belly button in size, but
Yeah.
I felt 7 feet tall just standing next to this, and what he's done on race relations, on political issues. He's a public intellectual, and he disproves the notion in Darwin's athletes, to get back to the point. They're not only physical specimens. You have people with high intelligence. He's written 12 books. He's spot on in his political commentary. And yet, if you look at his record post-career, he's never coached except for his a minor league. He has been sort of marginalized
No, he was
by the
blacklisted.
establishment.
Oh yeah, they
because
came back at him.
and because of his religious conversion. Right. It didn't seem to hurt Muhammad Ali as much eventually, but I think in the case of Kareem, he paid the price.
Yeah, he did.
As did several basketball players who were less famous. Ralph comes to mind.
Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, Craig Hodges.
Right.
I mean, you can go on and on with that, and we've talked about some of those folks in the past here. But I want to go because we're getting ready to conclude with this, Joe. What do you want the listeners to get out of your book? What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I hope people will realize that black athletes like Colin Kaepernick helped topple the worst president in the United States by kneeling and beating number 45 at this game. If you remember, when it first happened, the less than brilliant leader of the free world called the players SOBs, kicked them off their team. And what happened is he lost that angle. He was going to use it as a wedge to beat back the Biden campaign and supporters. And what happened, his own friend, Bob Kraft, with whom I went to college many years ago, who supported him financially, said, Colin Kaepernick can kneel. My players can kneel. And because many of his best players were African American, and they sensed that
Right.
Colin Kaepernick paid the price that most athletes would not be willing to do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
and when
we've
you
talked
look at
about that
some of the
before. Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about that
sure,
on the show.
when
Yeah, it's
you look at some of the quarterbacks, uh, I'm thinking of the Jets quarterback, number one draft choice, who's now third in the rotation. He could do a lot better than what we've seen, but of course he is exiled.
him. He's
He's
in
receiving
blacklisted.
the same treatment that Paul Robeson received in 1949. And
Except
in the
yeah.
book I mentioned that Robeson was the highest paid black entertainer prior to 49. He was earning $100,000 a year. Because of the blacklist and his pariah status, the next year he made $3,000.
It's amazing.
And he couldn't get a passport. In fact, the people in Canada wanted to hear him. So what they did, they actually set up a speaker system at Niagara
Right.
Falls where he could project his amazing bass baritone voice across, and like the river, he saluted in a showboat. He went. They couldn't stop him, and he's
Well,
one
Joe,
of my heroes because
oh
not
yeah.
only was he a great
And
athlete,
I have to tell my listeners too.
multi-talented.
Yeah, I have to tell my listeners, Joe has written a book about Paul Robeson too that you should check out. But Joe, I have to go now. I could talk. I want to talk to you some more. I'll probably get you back on here again.
I
I
would
want
love to come, and
to,
I'd
and
love
I
to
want
get
to
this
talk to you about
computer to
too.
work.
I want to talk to you also
Yeah.
about because I found out that you do this whole thing on comedy, especially Jewish humor, and you talk
Yes,
about
and
a lot of entertainers. I want to learn
yeah.
some. I want you to talk some more about that sometime on the show.
Well, okay, but in my book on Jewish humor, I have a chapter on black humor uh, as a spin-off because
Right.
Lenny Bruce influenced Red Fox and many other comedians who followed. And
Yeah,
there is a
and vice
very
versa.
close
Yeah.
kinship.
hmm
Yes, and
And vice
and
versa
so
too, because
anyway,
there's a whole thing. But
it
I got to go now, Joe. But thank you so much.
okay,
We're gonna get you
okay,
back
all
on
right.
here, and just thank you, Joe. And thank you so much for being on. And yeah, we could go all day with Joe. Joe's a great guy to talk to. I really enjoy talking to Joe. And again, the name of the book is The Black Athlete as Hero. It's on McFarland Press, and it's written by Joe Duristan. You can look at his name online. Go Google Joe, obviously Joe, and Duristan, Dorinsson, and find that book. It's a great book. Put it in your collection. Great present, great gift to have. Just something, and just a fountain of knowledge, Joe. Enjoy talking to him. But we're gonna get to more music here on the Root and Root Show, and I'm gonna do right now. I'm gonna do the Delvin Lamar organ trio, and we're gonna do the classic Curtis Mayfield song, "Move On Up." So let's hear that on the Root and Root Show.
Mr. Sam?
Look, man, Theo just talking about he stood up in it. You talking about you didn't play with it. What's really going on?
Look, man, I don't play with it at all.
Yeah, that's what you say, but when the doors closed, what really happened, man?
Man, I put my foot in it.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. When you took that fine girl home, and time came to get it on, did you make little mama moan? Did you knock it out the time zone? Did you give the girl the blues? Did you knock her socks out of her shoes? Make her fall in love with you? Tell me, man.
No, Sam, I didn't play with it. Night fall until the sun lit. I didn't get just a little bit. I got it all night long. I made a scream, O-B-O-B. Ooh, boy, what you doing to me? You're all the man I ever need. I can't take it no more.
Well, did you knock it out the park?
Yes, I did.
Did you make your dog bark?
Yes, I did.
Did you put your foot in it?
Yes, I did.
Put your foot in it.
Man, I put a hump in my back.
Did you
Girl,
buzz?
let you like it like that. I put my foot in. Yes, I did.
When I grow up, I wanna be like you. Make my girl scream and holler, beam her up like she brand new.
Ain't nothing wrong with that.
So
and broke your heart. Darling, to dry your eyes, I realize that you have got to make a new start. 'Cause your baby's gone and left, and you're making it all alone. And it's an uphill climb to the bottom when your love has gone. When your love has gone. Say, ever since the day I met you, something happened to my heart. When I looked at you, all at once I knew that we would never ever part. Yes, your baby's gone and left you, but I'm counting on you to make it on your own. 'Cause it's an uphill climb to the bottom when your love has gone. When your love has gone. Listen, baby, you and I can make some brand new dreams. Darling, take my hand. I understand. No matter how hard it seems, yes, all you've got to do is think about how hard it was to start. 'Cause I'm counting you to do it on your own. Oh, baby, I know it's an uphill climb to the bottom. Oh, when your love has gone, all you got to do is call me just one time.
The one and only Walter Jackson, and that was his uphill climb to the bottom. That went out for a buddy of mine, Rodney Franks, because we were talking about the Walter the other day online. And before that, we did the Astors and Candy. And then we did Mr. Sam and O.B. Buchanan and Put Your Foot in It. Anyway, and before that, we did the music of Move On Up by Curtis Mayfield, the interpretation on organ by Delvin Lamar Organ Trio. Hope you enjoyed that music on the Root and Root Show, as well as my interview with Joe Dorison talking about his book, Black Athlete as Hero. So McFarland Press, please pick it up. And I really, oh my goodness, I got to get out of here right now. But go in love and go in peace. Know yourself and help someone along the way. We'll see you next time on the Root and Root Show. This is Greg Rashid. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. And remember, spread the knowledge, share the power.